Hi, everyone. Yes, so my name is Mackenzie Hart, and I'm a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. So we have a short time frame, so I'm just going to jump right into it. What I'm going to present to you today was my comprehensive exam for my PhD, so it's a little bit large for a presentation, especially one that is 10 minutes long now. Question time, please let me know if anything was unclear. I'm happy to clarify. So, research on extremism now routinely analyzes data drawn from mainstream and fringe social media platforms. Not a surprise given where we are today. However, much of this research is narrow in scope. What I mean by this is it focuses on cumulative number of posts rather than individual users posting behavior. And there's little comparison across platforms and extremist ideologies. So, the question for my comprehensive exam was to compare Leak Society, a nihilistic violent extremist Telegram group, with Stormfront, a right-wing extremist forum, on the following dimensions: posting behavior, sentiment, and content. So, small introduction. Right-wing extremism, I think we're all familiar with, a network of formal and informal groups, communities, and individuals, active both on and offline, and generally based around this idea that the survival of a white in-group is necessitated by violence against out-groups, including Jewish people, people of color, LGBTQ community, etc. Here, we're talking about white supremacism in particular, and it can be further broken down into two sub-factors of neo-Nazism and accelerationism. So, for this current study, we're looking at Stormfront, the first online hate platform founded in 1995 and devoted mostly to white supremacist content. What I looked at here were 91,313 posts. That was inclusive of all sub-forums on the forum itself, and from January 2023 to end of December 2024. And that included 3,518 unique authors. So the comparative thing comes in here while looking across platforms, but also across ideologies or types of extremism. And the other part we're looking at here is nihilistic violent extremism, or NVE. This involves mostly an idea of disillusionment with or rejection of society, the glorification of violence, and the desire to bring about or accelerate social instability collapse. Ideology, end goal, questions. If you're interested in this more, there are plenty of panels that would be devoted on this topic. But here, where right-wing ideologies have an end goal, nihilistic violent extremists seem to lack this idea. So while white supremacists, for instance, are fighting for a better world for white people, there's not really a better world in this nihilistic violent extremist idea. So I can talk more about that in the question period if you have more to questions there. The groups that fall under these are many, but the most talked about is the COM network. So groups within this operate under kind of three pillars of harm based around sextortion, extortion, cybercrime, and offline violence. Again, I can speak more to this. But where ideology is more of a mobilizing factor for right-wing extremists, here with NVE, we see this focus on clout or status seeking. So getting into these spaces, individuals are required to share a piece of content, normally something violent, something to do with gore, something that might even be sextortion involved, so child sexual abuse material. That's where you might have heard groups like this mentioned recently, like 764, and also Leak Society. So this is the data set that I used for my NVE groups, and it was the inclusive of the entire channel's life on Telegram. So 33,934 messages from 2022 to 2024. And 5,358 unique authors present on that channel throughout its lifetime. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, I had three main research questions. The first one are there likes of group users with similar posting behavior on Stormfront and Leak Society, and how does this differ between platform? For this, I use group-based trajectory analysis. I can speak more to this afterwards, but that was what I chose to use. And for question two was, how does the content produced by users on these platforms differ? And that was in terms of structure, so word count, the use of net speak and swear words, affect, so here positive and negative tone and emotion. I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by tone versus emotion when I get to that section. And topics, so politics, ethnicity, interpersonal conflict, sexual behavior, and gender. Okay, so to do this, I used LIWC 22, a comparative t-tests, and qualitative analyses. I won't focus on the qualitative analyses, but I will use them when I'm interpreting the findings of the statistical tests here. And question three was, is there a relationship between posting behavior and the use of affect? So here, positive, negative, tone, and emotion. And that, I used ANOVA and, again, the qualitative analysis to help give a bit more oomph behind what we're talking about. Okay, So for our first research question, we have the two platforms, and the group-based trajectory analysis was run on the log of boosting behavior, which was posts per quarter. So each individual user had a number of posts per quarter that they produced, and the group-based trajectory analysis uses their posts per quarter to basically find people with like behaviors. So the number of posts that they produced per quarter were similar to other people. And it groups the population into different groups of like behavior. So on Stormfront, we found 3 groups, the first of which was consistently low posters. And this was also the highest proportion of people. So most people on Stormfront posted very few. While I ran the group-based trajectory analysis on the natural log post, what you see here is actually their raw number of posts for more interpretive meaning, because the log, who cares? Helpful for the statistics, not helpful for the actual interpretation. So you can see that they were consistently low, but still around 2,000 posts and slowly dipping throughout time. Then we had a group that I called the D-Sisters. So started with high posting and slowly dipped to 0 after about quarter 4. And consistently high were the smallest amount of posters, but again, posting a lot over time, but also slightly decreasing. So compared to a forum, we have Leak Society. Different, really different groups. So increasers here. Compared to Stormfront, there are no increasers. Everyone is slowly decreasing in the amount of time and posting that they're spending here. But on Leak Society, we see that actually 40.5% of people who belong to that platform were in this group of increasing. I'll point out that quarter 6, something happened with the channel. It wasn't clear from the data if there was no collection issue, but it seems like people weren't using the channel for a little bit of time. There's a lot of clout, and I said infighting between different comm network groups, so it's possible that on Leak Society they either had a security threat, decided to stop using the channel for a bit. It warrants a bit more investigation, but I've put the trend lines in there to just sort of help ignore the dip, but I wanted to stay true to the actual data here. We also had a group of D-Sisters on Leak Society, 19.7% of people. And then the slow decreasers. So they actually jump up in behavior, but slowly go back down. So again, almost the same amount of proportion-wise as the increasers here. Happy to speak to this a bit more, and we'll come back to it in the key findings. So my second set of question here was, what are these people actually talking about on these channels? How does it work? I used LIWC, okay, so it counts the words in a segment of text, and based on that, it matches the words that go into these sub-dictionaries that all measure different psychosocial constructs or domains. So there's words, word stems, short phrases, numbers that all are associated with what these constructs are. And it calculates a percentage of the total words found in the different subdictionaries. Confusing. Example, social media posts containing 100 words, maybe 10 of these words relate to negative emotion and 5 of them are related to ethnicity, and it displays these as percentages. So 10% negative emotion, 5% ethnicity. Fine. So for Stormfront, the thing is here that both of these, so LIWC requires text to be over 50 words before it to be considered accurate. And for Stormfront, this was not as big an issue because the forum is a more, you post longer messages, you spend time there thinking about things, but on Leak Society, we're talking about a Telegram channel, which is more instant messages. So the messages there were more frequent and shorter. So I couldn't really run an LIWC analysis on a message of 4 words. However, that author might have posted 17 messages that day, cumulatively, which was over 50 words. So what I did was combine each individual author's text output into a daily output of text that allowed me to run that through LIWC and have a good chunk of understanding. I'm giving my 2-minute thing here. So basically what I did, data reduction. Put them all into daily outputs that allowed me to test for the t-tests. So I won't talk to you about all the different things here, but what I want to say is that there was significant differences on every single one of the dimensions I measured, except for positive tone, or negative tone, rather. I will summarize. Okay, so Stormfront posts, they contain significantly fewer words associated with net speak, swear words, positive emotion, negative emotion, positive tone, sex, mental health, and yeah, so I can come back to that quickly. I'm gonna skip the ANOVA tables because they're ugly and go straight to the main takeaways, which I'll put up here for you guys. Okay, so there were different groups of posting behavior on both platforms, both three. However, Leak Society was the only platform that had an increaser group. And even D-Sisters had a period of increased posting before they'd left the platform or stopped posting. Stormfront here was an ideological space or community. So they used significantly less extreme language, but the extreme language and negatively that they used was directed outwards at right-wing extremist outgroups. So talking about very anti-Black, anti-Semitic language. For Leak Society, the negative and extreme language was internal. So this was more indicative of the victimization of each other in that space, but also that the increased use of positive language was not for positive things. It was usually being used to coerce others into committing acts of self-harm, of external violence, interpersonal violence, or also to solicit nude photos of each other. And finally, there wasn't really a strong relationship between those group-based trajectory analysis, so the groups of posting behavior didn't have a lot to do with the tone that they were using or the sentiment they were using. The idea being like, if you're talking about negative things, are you spending less time on this platform? Or are you posting a lot and talking about really nice things? So consistently low posters on Stormfront had significantly lower scores for negative tone compared to D-Sisters and high posters. Basically, the less negative stuff was because they weren't actually engaging in that ideological discussion of negative outgroups. Again, I can come back to this later. I realize there's a lot to cover. And then on Leak Society, increasers use significantly more negative tone than the others. So the more time that they were spending on there, the more negative they were becoming. And that's more indicative of that clout and infighting that takes place on the platform. So I have new questions and next steps. But basically, the one thing I want to highlight here is that while I found differences and comparative between platforms, it's unclear in the current study whether those differences are because of the platforms, Telegram versus a forum, or because those people are actually displaying different behaviors because of their ideological or typology. Okay? And what I also say here is that, as I said, the positive language that was being used on Leak Society wasn't actually for positive things. So my point being here is that while we can use things like sentiment analysis to prove that there are statistical differences between topics and structure, use of affect, that the qualitative analysis is what actually helps us understand what those differences are. I would say Leak Society uses higher positive language. It's a more positive forum. Not the case. Okay. Next step for me would be to go back through this. I'm usually a big Q qualitative researcher, hence this is an ugly ANOVA table. So I want to go back in and actually do an in-depth study and look at what the two platforms are saying to kind of back up the statistical significance differences that this study showed. Okay, thank you. Happy to answer any questions during the period.